The letter arrived in the cold marrow of March, ink smudged by wet fingers, stamped out of Missouri and curled at the corners. It had taken near 3 weeks to reach the widow in Sable Ridge, Wyoming, where the wind cut even God down to size. She read it by lantern light, knuckles trembling over the oil-stained kitchen table. Her name, Mrs. Hollis Ward, was penned delicate on the envelope, but there was nothing delicate left in her life. The ranch, what was left of it, lay a mile past the last telegraph post, out where the roads died and the land gave way to shale and ghosts. Her husband Silas had died 2 winters ago, throat slit open in the barn by something more desperate than coyotes. They found him slumped beside the mule's feed trough with his mouth full of hay and blood. Sheriff chalked it up to raiders, but Hollis knew better. Raiders don't leave a man's wedding ring in his mouth. Since then, it had been her and the land was losing. She hadn't told anyone about the ad, not even Mrs. Finch, who brought mail every Friday on a mule named Gunpowder. The ad was short and strange, scrawled and folded small like it wanted to hide. Widowed woman 31 seeking strong man to assist with livestock, fencing, and winter stores. Must be unmarried, God-fearing, and silent. No drunkards, no questions, room and board. Marriage possible if work is honest. Address, Hollis Ward, Red Elk Basin, WI. She hadn't expected an answer, not from anyone real. But this man, Reuben Thatcher, he'd written back twice. His letters were clean, polite, precise, like someone who knew the weight of every word. He claimed to be a former Union scout, 36, unclaimed by family, willing to travel far and stay long if the terms were right. There was a photo enclosed in the last one, grainy, with a creased face and storm-heavy eyes, not handsome, but serious. And she needed serious. Now, as April chewed the frost from the hills and the snow broke into black mud, Hollis hitched up her mare and rode into town to meet the man she'd summoned like a sin. He stepped off the noon train 3 days late, dust on his boots, no hat, canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Reuben Thatcher stood like he'd been carved from the side of a wind-blasted hill, broad, still, eyes tracking everything but landing on nothing too long. Hollis watched him from her wagon, arms folded, jaw tight. He saw her and walked slow, deliberate. "You're Hollis Ward?" he asked. His voice was low, coarse as coffee grounds. "I am, you Reuben." "I am." They shook hands. His were work-rough and cold. She didn't speak as he loaded into the wagon, neither did he. The road back to Red Elk was a rattling, narrow scar through black timber and sage. The land opened wide and ugly as a wound, barbed wire sagging from rotted fence posts, the barn leaning like it had given up. No smoke from the chimney, no dogs barking, just wind. Reuben took it all in, eyes narrowing once at the barn. "You live alone?" he asked. "I do now." He nodded once, then said nothing more. That night she set him in the bunkhouse with a cot, a stove, a jug of water. He didn't complain, didn't ask for more. And when she went to bed, she locked her door, same as she had every night since Silas died. But sleep didn't come, not easy, not with a stranger on her land, not with the weight of the letter still folded in her apron, the one she hadn't sent, the one she'd written to a marshal in Cheyenne that started with the words, "I know who killed my husband." But she didn't send it, not yet, not with Reuben Thatcher here now, not with the way he moved like someone who could bury a man without leaving a mark. In the morning he was up before her, chopping wood in the fog, shirt off, sweat steaming off his shoulders like smoke. She watched from the porch, arms crossed, wondering what he ran from and whether it would ever catch up. The wind shifted. He looked up, their eyes met, and something passed between them, something quiet and sharp. Neither spoke. But something had begun, something neither of them could name yet. And something else, older, bloodier, had already woken. By the second week, the land began to change shape under Reuben's hands. Fences stood straighter. The sagging barn door was rehung with new hinges forged in town. He culled the diseased calves without flinching, set traps along the ridge, and rode out each morning before dawn to mend what winter had chewed through. He worked like he'd been raised by the land, not on it. No grumbling, no boasting, just muscle and silence. Hollis watched him through the cracked kitchen window while she scrubbed the skillet. There was something in his stillness that reminded her of mountain lions, quiet, efficient, unwilling to waste motion. He never spoke about his past, nor asked after hers. They shared meals in silence, and after dinner he'd return to the bunkhouse while she bolted the door behind him. On the 12th night, a coyote came too close. Reuben shot it clean through the eye from the porch before she even heard it. He didn't speak of it, just dragged the carcass out of sight. Still, Hollis didn't sleep easy. That spring, Red Elk Basin held its breath. The melt came hard and fast, swallowing gullies, washing out paths. Reuben repaired the northern bridge without being asked. When he returned, soaked and grimed, he handed her a bundle of sodden feathers and said, "Quail nest got knocked loose. Thought maybe you'd want the eggs." She took them, said nothing. He never tried to charm her, never lingered in the kitchen after meals, never touched anything that wasn't his. There was a decency to it, but also distance, like he knew something about himself that made him dangerous if he got too close. By May, the grass had returned. The hills burned gold at sunset, but peace never really settled, not with what still hung between them. One night, a rider came. Hollis heard him before she saw him, hooves drumming like fists on a door. She stepped onto the porch with the shotgun in hand. Reuben came from the bunkhouse, coat half-buttoned, pistol tucked under his arm. The rider pulled up fast. His face was shadowed, but Hollis recognized the voice. "Ma'am," he said, hat in hand. "Sheriff till from Ravel County, looking for a woman named Hollis Ward." Reuben stepped forward, slow. "She's here," he said. "What's your business?" The sheriff ignored him, eyes locked on Hollis. "You wrote a letter last fall," he said. "Said you had information about your husband's death, claimed it was a man from town, claimed it was murder, then you never followed up." Hollis stiffened, her breath stuck in her chest. "I didn't send it," she said. "Someone did," the sheriff replied. "Signed your name, rode through Sable Ridge last week, and someone handed it over." She looked to Reuben. His face didn't move, but something flared behind his eyes. "I'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow," the sheriff said. "We'll take your full statement." "I ain't leaving the ranch," she said flatly. "Then I'll send a deputy. Either way, we need the truth." He tipped his hat and rode off into the dark. Reuben stood still long after the hoofbeats faded. Then he looked at her, voice low. "You didn't send it." "No." "Then who did?" She didn't answer, just stared out at the hills. Inside, her heart pounded like hooves in her ribs. Someone had found the letter. Someone who wanted what was buried to come out. That night she unlocked the cellar, pulled up the boards beneath the pantry shelf, reached in and retrieved a small, rusted tin. Inside were two things, a silver locket caked with blood and a drawing of a brand burned into human skin. Reuben found her sitting on the floor, tin open in her lap. He didn't speak, just crouched beside her, one hand on his knee, the other brushing the edge of the tin. "You know what that mark is?" she asked. He nodded once. "It's from Dry Creek Prison," he said. "Belonged to the Thorn Riders, used to be just bandits, then something worse." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They killed Silas, burned our name off the land, and they're still watching." Reuben didn't flinch, just looked at her like he'd known it all along. "Why'd you send for me?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Because I don't want justice." Her voice went hollow. "I want the last one buried alive." Reuben stood slowly, picked up the locket, turned it over in his hand like a coin. "You hired the wrong man," he said. And for the first time, she saw something flicker behind his silence. "But you might have found the right monster." He closed the tin, set it in her hands. "Tomorrow," he said, "we dig." And she knew then her secret hadn't changed everything. It had only just begun. The Thorn Riders had no flag, no uniform, no law. They moved like fire, sudden, directionless, ruinous. Their mark meant ruin followed. Hollies had seen the brand on a man's neck once, just after the snow melted the year Silas died. A drifter with a bent spine and hollow eyes came to trade pelts and left a scar on her memory instead. She hadn't known then what it meant, not fully. Only that he spat at her boots and grinned with broken teeth. Only that Silas was dead a week later. Now Reuben spoke the name like a curse he'd tasted before. "You said they burned your name off the land," he said. "You ever figure why?" She nodded, slow, bitter. "Silas bought this ranch with blood money. I didn't know at first. It came from a payroll robbery gone sideways out of Colorado. 3 dead. Thorn Riders lost 2 of their own. He was part of the crew that betrayed them, ran east, changed his name. Bought livestock, married me, tried to make it look clean." Her jaw clenched. "They found him, made an example, then left me a widow in a place where widows don't last long." Reuben didn't ask if she'd loved him. That was another kind of violence. He didn't ask why she stayed. He simply stood, slow and steady, like a man loading his own coffin, and said, "I know where they are." Hollies looked up sharp. "There's a canyon west of Dagger Ridge. No trails, just rockfall and shadows. They hole up there now, run whiskey and guns through the hills, trade blood for coin." She narrowed her eyes. "How do you know?" "I've been hunting them," he said, "since '67. That was all, no names, no scars shown." By the next morning, the ranch was quieter than usual. The chickens wandered without fuss. The wind barely spoke. Reuben saddled both horses before she finished her coffee. "You're riding with me?" he asked without looking at her. "I sent the ad," she said. "I see it through." They left before the sun cleared the ridge. The canyon was 2 days out, past the old Spanish ruins and the pine-burnt ridgelines. They camped by dry riverbeds, drank from the skins, ate jerky that turned their jaws raw. Reuben didn't sleep much. Hollies barely slept at all. The closer they got, the more her blood turned cold. On the second night, he told her something in the dark. "They killed my brother," he said. "Thorn Riders strung him from a telegraph pole outside Laramie. He was 15. They thought he talked." She didn't answer. There was no answer to that. By morning, they reached the mouth of the canyon. It yawned like a split rib cage, all jagged rock and whispers. Reuben tied the horses and handed her a rifle. "They camp in threes," he said, "sleep in shifts, but there's a cave on the south wall where they keep the dead things. Old loot, old mistakes. If there's proof Silas was with them, it'll be there." They moved like shadows, boots soft, breath held. Hollies' legs ached with each step, but she didn't slow. She thought of the locket. She thought of the day she found Silas with his face in the hay, his hands curled like he'd tried to crawl away from death. They found the first rider by the fire pit. His beard was full of grease and bones. Reuben dropped him with a knife, no sound but the wet choke of dying breath. The second they caught by the cave mouth. This one younger, hands shaking even before the barrel met his brow. "Where the cave stash?" Reuben asked. "West wall," the man stammered, "behind the black rocks." Reuben nodded, then shot him in the stomach, left him to bleed. Hollies didn't flinch. The cave stank of rot and rusted things. Lantern light flickered off old saddles, crates marked with southern rail stamps, bones of animals and men jumbled together. In the back, buried under a tarp, they found a trunk. Inside, letters, maps, a belt buckle with the initials SW, and a small velvet pouch. Hollis opened it, her breath stopped. Silas's wedding ring, still speckled with dried blood. "Now we make it right," she whispered. Reuben turned toward her, face unreadable. "You ready to bleed for this?" "I already did," she said. "Now it's their turn." That night they lit the canyon on fire, set the tents ablaze, shot the horses, left the bodies in a circle with the thorn mark carved in reverse into their flesh. Reuben wrote one word on the rock wall in their blood: judged. As dawn rose, they rode out, smoke behind them, vengeance still clinging to their clothes like ash. But neither spoke of going home, not yet. There were still names on the list, and the list was long. The trail west turned dry and mean. After the canyon burned, Reuben rode with silence stitched into every motion. Hollis followed close behind, rifle slung low, coat drawn tight. They didn't go back to Red Elk. Couldn't. The Thorn Riders weren't like other gangs. Kill a few and you rouse the rest. What they'd done was a signal. A wound opened. Now the bleeding would begin. They cut across bone country, badlands full of bleached cattle skulls and spidering gullies. Towns grew fewer. Water ran brackish. Holly stopped wearing her ring, slid it into the pouch beside Silas's, zipped the leather shut like a tomb. In Bellrope, they found the next one. He went by the name Crowley, but the ledger in the cave marked him proper. Benjamin Crowley, alias B. Crows, ex-Garson gang, current Thorn, left ear missing. The man had taken up work as a carpenter, hiding behind a limp and a false smile. Reuben saw through it first, spotted the tilt of his gait, the way he kept one hand always near the pocket where he hid a blade. They followed him 2 days. He went nowhere without a jug of corn mash and a Colt under his vest. On the 3rd day, Hollis walked into the carpenter's shop before dawn. Reuben waited outside. She carried no rifle, just a small hatchet with a pine handle. Crowley turned at the creak of the door. "You lost?" he asked. "I know what you did to my husband," she said. He froze, then smiled, yellow teeth, slow drawl. "Lot of widows think they know things." "You fed him hay after you slit his throat," she said. The smile faltered. His hand went to the pocket. She buried the hatchet in his neck before he could draw. He gurgled once, slumped against the bench, eyes wide. Blood pulsed out in thick arcs, staining the shavings on the floor. Hollis stepped back, chest heaving. Reuben entered a minute later, took one look and nodded. "We leave before light." They buried the body in the hills. No grave marker. Just stones, just silence. From Bellrope, they moved north, chasing names like wolves after blood. Each town, a new face. Each man, a piece of the old gang reborn in a quieter skin. There was Wesley Doyle, posing as a preacher in Fallowbend. He wept when they cornered him behind the altar. Hollis slit his throat with his own ceremonial blade. Then came the twins, Martin and Miles Case, running a poker den out of a dry cellar in Parth. Reuben shot them both in the kneecaps before setting the place alight. Hollis watched the flames reflect in the puddles of blood at her feet and felt nothing. But the closer they came to the end of the list, the more the earth seemed to turn against them. Their names spread in whispers. A woman and a ghost, trailing fire and bone. One night, a bounty hunter found them in the ruins of an old trading post. He was young, talkative, and drunk on the legend already. "I ain't afraid of you," he said, pistol drawn. "I just want the bounty, double if I bring the woman in alive." Reuben didn't blink. He stepped forward, slow and even. "You think we're what the papers say?" he asked. The boy faltered. Hell yes. Reuben drew and shot him through the mouth. Then you came too late. They left him there, didn't check his name. By the time they reached the foot of the Beartooth Mountains, only one name remained. Malcolm Vey. He'd been their leader, the brand had been his idea, the knife in Silas's neck likely his hand. In the cave trunk, his name had been etched in deeper ink, underlined twice. Beside it, lives like a king in Birch Hollow, untouchable. Birch Hollow was no town, it was a fortress. 3 ridges high, tucked in the trees, guarded by dogs and men with shotguns. Reuben scouted it 3 days, came back scratched, silent. There's no way in quiet, he said, not this time. Hollis stared at the ridge. Her hands ached from the cold, her back from the saddle, but her heart had grown quiet. I didn't come this far for quiet, she said. They waited for nightfall. They painted their faces with ash, slit the dog throats before the men heard, slipped past the lower watchfires like shadows between branches. Reuben took the east flank. Hollis crept up the center, belly to the stone, breath steady. Her fingers curled around the trigger like prayer. They breached the walls at dawn. Guns cracked in the half-light, men shouted, fled, died choking. Reuben moved through them like fire through dry grass. Hollis took each shot slow, precise, no panic, just justice. They found Vey in the back house, curled in a chair, half-drunk and missing 2 toes from frostbite. Age had gutted him. He looked up at her with milky eyes and laughed. You think I remember your husband, he slurred. You think I remember any of em? Hollis said nothing. She took the pouch from her coat, opened it, showed him the 2 rings. His smile faltered. She pulled the blade from her boot. Reuben watched from the door, said nothing as she carved the thorn brand into Vey's chest, backward and slow. Then she put the ring in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Snow began to fall the next day, quiet, steady, blanketing the blood-streaked dirt and scattered brass casings. Birch Hollow smoked like a dying campfire, its walls broken, its guards either dead or scattered into the hills. Nothing stirred but the crows. Reuben found Hollis sitting by the creek at the base of the ridge, boots off, her feet in the freezing water. She hadn't spoken since she'd pulled the trigger. The gun sat beside her like a dead hand. Her sleeves were still wet with Vey's blood, but her face was clean. Hollow, though, like something had been burned out of her and nothing had come back to fill it. He crouched beside her, one knee to the stone. You got what you wanted, he said. She looked straight ahead, eyes unfocused, a faint smile brittle as frost. Did I? The water moved slow around her ankles, thin ice drifting between stones. She hadn't cried, not after Vey, not once in the hours since. Reuben didn't expect her to. He'd seen vengeance land like a stone in others, loud, violent, but for her it had landed like a silence, a final, cold quiet. They'll send more, he said. I know. You ready for that? No. She lifted her feet from the water, boots laced up without looking. Her fingers moved stiffly, like every motion was through fog. Reuben offered her his canteen. She took a swig and handed it back without a word. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her she hadn't turned into what they'd been. But lies weren't the kind of comfort she'd ever take. So he said only this. I buried Vey under the hawthorn tree, marked it with nothing, just stone like the others. She nodded. We done? He asked. She looked at him for the first time in hours. No, she said, but I don't know what's left. They rode east, away from the wreck of the hollow, through the pass where the snow thickened, blotting out the trail. Days passed in a blur of white and silence. No towns, no fires, just the steady rhythm of hooves through drifts and breath misting in the cold. On the sixth day they came upon a cabin, sagging, half-eaten by rot, smoke curling from the chimney. Reuben approached first, hand on the grip of his revolver. Inside, a man and a girl sat by the fire, father likely, his hands up. The girl no older than 10. They'd taken in a traveling preacher, the man said a few days before, who left a Bible and took half their dried meat. Reuben asked what the man looked like. The answer made his mouth tighten. "You think it's a writer?" Hollies asked when they left. "Not one of the old ones," Reuben said. "Maybe a seed from their rot." They camped 10 miles out under a bluff. Hollies sat near the fire, carving a length of wood, not to whittle, just to keep her hands from shaking. "You ever think we're just sweeping the ocean back with a broom?" she asked. Reuben shrugged. "We ain't meant to end it, just meant to make blood for the years we had to survive." She didn't answer. That night Hollies dreamed of Silas, not as he died, but as he was in the early days. Laughing, sleeves rolled, coaxing the foal out of the barn with an apple, the dream changed. The foal became a man, twisted and grinning, his breath sharp with hay and rot. He whispered her name, and she woke with her nails dug into her palms. Reuben was already awake. He always was. "I need to go back," she said, voice raw. "To the ranch." She nodded. "There's things buried there I didn't finish." Reuben didn't question it. They broke camp before first light and turned their horses back toward Red Elk. They arrived under rain. The ranch looked smaller, the wind harsher. Fence posts sagged again, the barn slumped like an old man in prayer, but the house still stood. A hawk circled overhead, watching their return like a sentinel. Reuben went to the barn without a word. Holly stood on the porch, hand on the door she hadn't opened in months. Inside, everything was dust and memory, the table where Silas once sat, the chair she'd rocked in, trying not to scream when the frost crept into the walls, the cellar beneath the pantry. She went down alone. The tin was still there, still locked, but beneath it now, tucked into the floorboards, was something she didn't remember leaving, a folded piece of paper, stained, marked with a scrawl she hadn't seen in years. "You think you know what he took from us. You don't." The bottom bore the mark again, thorn, fresh ink. When she came back up, Reuben was waiting. "They're not done," she said. "No." She opened her hand and showed him the paper. "There's someone else." His eyes scanned the mark, jaw clenched. "I thought it ended with they," he said. "It doesn't." He didn't ask what she meant to do. He didn't ask what it would cost. He just said, "Then we start again." And somewhere beyond the ridge, a new shadow moved. Summer came late to Red Elk. The high snows clung to the peaks long into June, and the rivers ran high with melt frothing white over the stones. Holly stood in the field at dawn, watching the light crawl slow across the fence line. The ground was damp. The wind smelled of cold ash and new grass. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote called, but no dogs answered. They never replaced them. Reuben sat on the porch, sharpening his knife. The sound rasped steady, like breath. His coat was still dusty from the ride home, but neither of them spoke of leaving again. Not yet. For weeks they waited. Patched what could be patched, burned what couldn't. Hollies replanted the garden with calloused hands. Reuben rode the perimeter each morning, rifle slung low, eyes always scanning the trees. The letter from the cellar stayed pinned above the hearth. Neither of them touched it again. They didn't need to. They knew what it meant. The Thorn Riders weren't just a gang. They weren't even men anymore, not in the usual sense. They were an inheritance, passed down through camps, whispered into ears around outlaw fires, a way of surviving that fed on blood and fear and women left alone in wild places. But not this one. Not anymore. It was late July when the first scout came. A boy, maybe 15, dust-slicked, face red with sun and heat, rode in at dusk, pretended to be lost, asked for water. Hollis handed him a tin cup and watched the way his eyes scanned the windows, the barn, the shadows behind her. He wore no mark, but she saw the bulge of a knife hilt beneath his coat. She let him drink, let him thank her, let him turn his back. Then she took the knife from the table and put it through his spine. He gasped once and collapsed in the dust. Reuben came out a breath later, dragging the body toward the shed. He didn't ask why, he knew. They came in twos after that, then fours. Every few days, riders circling, watching, never close, never bold. Testing. One night they found a dead crow nailed to the door. Its wings spread wide, stomach split, blood dried black. Hollis took it down and buried it with the others. Her graveyard now included 24 bones, half a barn of ghosts, and the memory of a man who died choking on hay. Reuben stood beside her as she pressed the dirt flat. "They're baiting you," he said. She looked up. "I know. They want you to ride out, to come looking." She shook her head, voice flat. "No more chasing, let them come." She spent that night cleaning her father's old Sharps rifle, sat by the fire, brushing oil into the bolt, checking the scope alignment. She hadn't used it in years. Not since the first time Silas came home bloodied and smiling, a bag of gold in his hand, and told her not to ask questions. Reuben smoked a cigar in the dark, watching, thinking. "They'll burn this place down before they leave you be," he said. "Let them try." And when the fire finally came, it came all at once. No warnings, no riders. Just torchlight in the trees and the stink of kerosene on the wind. They hit at midnight from all sides. Reuben was already in the field, shots cracking sharp into the black. Hollis crouched by the window, picking off shapes in the dark, her breath even, her heart slow. They moved like insects, too many legs, too many eyes. Faces painted, marks burned into bare chests, knives raised like gospel. But this land had already buried the worst of them. And it had learned how to keep the dead down. The fight lasted less than an hour. By dawn, the yard was soaked in blood, bodies smoking in the embers of the barn, horses screaming as they tore from the fence line into the hills. Hollis stood in the ashes, rifle empty, hands blackened, smoke curling from her dress hem. Reuben knelt by the last man, a tall one, tattoos down his arms, mouth torn open by buckshot, but still breathing. Hollis walked to him slow. He looked up at her, teeth red. "You think you won," he whispered. "You think it ends with us." She crouched low, close enough to smell the blood in his lungs. "It ends with whoever forgets we can fight back." Then she drove the knife in. No hesitation. No regret. And afterward she didn't cry, didn't fall, didn't even speak. She stood, brushed her hands off on her skirt, and turned toward what remained of the ranch. The fences could be rebuilt, the barn might not, but the house still stood. The garden hadn't burned, and her name, her land, her silence, they were hers again. Reuben joined her an hour later. Shirt torn, arm bandaged, eyes as quiet as the sunrise behind him. They didn't say much. He poured coffee. She salted the beans for dinner. The fire crackled. Outside, the crows returned. Not as omens, just as birds. And in the hush of the hills, beneath the bruised sky and charred timbers, Hollis Ward finally understood the kind of story she'd written with blood and grit and steel. Not a tragedy. A warning.